Yeah. Nah, I'm playing. I got those bars. Just messing with you. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Let me adjust my screen right quick. Bam. All right, so I have quite a bit of extra languages real quick. I do have some Ilocano that somebody requested for me to speak. So I got nine bag na bigat. I think that's how you say it. Nine bag na migat. Bigat. Sorry. Good morning to you guys. Kamusta na? I believe that's Ilocano as well. So it's kind of like some mixture the way you say certain things. As always, all my people that speak Tagalog, magandang umaga, aking mga kaibigan, kamusta to you guys. Ingat lagi mabuhay to you guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by. For all my people that speak Cebuano, maayong buntog, akong mahigala. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And for anybody who might be Latvian or who speaks Latvian, I have Svieki and Paldis. Hello, and I appreciate you guys stopping by, taking a look. Especially all my people that are coming from Russia, who might be, have at one point been part of the USSR, who, feels like Mikhail Tal represents them as well. Privyet to you, spasibo. Appreciate you guys stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. And one thing I will say about the languages, I do get, I do encourage people to give me things to say. I like to speak different languages, but just to let everybody know, I do very heavily screen what people tell me to say. I double check and make sure that I'm not saying something. I had a situation that happened many months ago where somebody basically wanted me to cuss out all of the Philippines. So I accidentally did that on video. For all of my people that have been watching my stuff, they know that I would never do that. But I just make for sure that I'm very careful with, exactly what I'm, saying. So just letting everybody know, if you guys do give me something to say in a different language, I will double check it and make sure that it's not anything bad. So be wary of what you actually show me. I actually had to block somebody a minute ago because they told me to, call everybody ugly. And I mean, that's not what we want. I'm trying to keep everything nice and peaceful, and I'm very appreciative of everybody coming by, taking a look at my stuff. And you guys know I do not talk this much, but I had to say all of that, so I appreciate it very much. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and jump into the game. So we have knight to f3, knight to f6, we got c4, we got g6, knight to c3. And actually, it's crazy because knight to c3 as of 1973 is a novelty. You're looking at the position like, man, we only played a couple of moves. Exactly. This is the third move in the game, and we're out of novelty. So that just kind of lets you know, up until a certain point, it was pretty streamlined, like, what people really played. So, there wasn't a lot of varying, in a lot of different directions. As you guys can see now, I mean, you got people throwing A4, H4 out of there, like, because they can kind of correct it later with the computer. Stuff like that. But back in, in the 60s, 70s, I mean, they kind of stuck to, kind of like either the modern school or the hyper modern school or the classical school. So, I mean, they kind of had like a certain way they played. So, like I said, knight to c3 is a novelty as of 1973. It does get picked up, a lot more later. So we see bishop to g7. We got g3. We got castles by black. Bishop to g2. We got c5. We got d4. Pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to c6. We have castles by white. We have in this position what is called, it is the English opening, the Fianchetto Mecking variation. Now, there was a guy that used to play, and he played this pretty heavily after 73, like 76 on to the 80s. His name was Henrique Mecking, Brazilian guy. And so this was, because of the fact that he played it so heavily, it was named after him. So that's why we have, like I said, the Mecking variation now. So moving on, we got knight takes d4, queen takes d4. We have d6, queen to d3. We have a6, bishop to e3. We got knight to g4. And this is always an annoying move. I played some, King's Indian Larson variation type stuff as white, and so it kind of has like a similar setup with the bishop to e3 after e4, and this knight to d4 can be somewhat annoying because you are trying to get rid of that nice bishop for this uglier knight, and you are also freeing up your bishop here for some scope. So We do see bishop to d4, offering a trade of bishops. And we got knight to e3. And now we're kicking the queen away from its nice d3 square that's protecting the c4 pawn. So we do retreat back to d1. And we've actually gotten to a point in the game. Before I get into what was, actually played in the game, I want you to go ahead and stop the video real quick. And if you are black, what would you actually play in this position? Go ahead and do so real quick. Okay, cool. So what was actually played in the game was rook to b8. Now, there's a reason why this move is played. Like another move is played other than one that I'm curious if anybody was to actually come up on this move. Anybody who might would have guessed to take the pawn on c4, this is actually a trap. It might seem, when you're looking at it, it might seem like it's just a free pawn because you're like, man, okay, I backed up. I knocked the queen away. Now this pawn is taken. But unfortunately, after the knight takes on c4, this is losing an entire piece because you can actually take on g7. And then after, the king takes on g7, we see queen to d4 with check, completely winning this knight because it is now undefended. And you've basically lost the knight for a pawn. So like I always say, be very careful when you're trying to take those pawns because sometimes there can be a little trap, associated with it. So always think twice. Sometimes the pawn is just free. Sometimes it's like, hey, man, take me, eat me. But, sometimes it's not free. Like in this particular situation, the black knight would have been reaching into the candy jar. So getting forward, it's quite like a long game. So I'm going to try to go ahead and get through it real quick. The rook comes to b8. We see rook to c1. Bishop comes to e6. Knight goes to d5 because we are actually attacking the c4 pawn now. We see b5. Pawn takes b5. Bishop takes d5. Nice little in-betweener. Bishop takes on d5. We see pawn takes b5. Queen to d2. Now we actually have a pretty good situation here for white because we do have a pawn majority on the queen side against this lone pawn. So we do possibly have maybe a situation where we can create a passed pawn in the future. So we got to look out for that. So we see e6. The bishop comes down to g2. And at the moment, white does have the bishop pair, so they are doing actually pretty well. So we got knight to c4. And this knight is really, really nicely placed on that c4 square. So we see queen to c3, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4. We got d5. I mean, because you're really just trying to like cement this knight here on the c4 square. But unfortunately, white does have b3, and that does kick the knight away. So after queen to b6, and you are as black taking advantage of the fact that this queen is undefended and just stuck in the middle of the board. So the rook f comes to d1, protecting the queen. Queen takes d4, rook takes d4, and now we have to move the knight. The knight comes to d6. We got rook to c6, rook f to d8. We have e3 by white, rook b to c8. The rook comes to b6. We see rook to c1. Now, the tide is very much turning in black's direction. We have the penetration by black's rook. The rook is completely taking over this file. It's starting to get pretty dominant. And I'll be able to show you in a couple of moves exactly why. The bishop comes down to f1 to protect the check. Knight comes to e4. Then we have king to g2. And like I said before, the main situation for black is the fact that they have this knight beautifully placed in the center of the board. It's a true octopus, as I say a lot. You just have really, really good penetration here by black's pieces here. And so we see e5 attacking this rook. So we have rook to b4, rook to c2. And like I said before, we have complete control of this file for black. We have this knight really beautifully placed in the middle of the board. We can even super reinforce with f5. This pawn is very, very weak. So as I'm always saying, f7, f2, very, very weak. If you get any type of beginner books, opening books, it's going to be harping on f2 and f7 being very weak. If you get any type of attacking type books, like the Art of Attack or something like that, it's going to be very, very severely talking about f2 and f7. And this rook is just beautifully placed on this white 7th rank. So we see a4, pawn takes a4, pawn takes a4. We got rook takes f2 with check, knocks the king down. You have to try to maintain the bishop there on g1 or f1. We got rook to a2. We have rook to b8. It's pretty much forcing the trade of rooks because that king is, the rook is pinned down to the king. So we go ahead and trade there on b8 with rook takes b8, rook takes b8. We have king to g7. We have rook down to b5. We have knight to c3. Basically saying you're not gonna have that a pawn. Like, we want the a pawn. So the rook goes to c5. We see knight down to d1. Rook takes d5. Knight takes e3. Rook takes e5. Knight takes f1. King takes f1. And I mean, pretty much it does look like, it does look like each side is pretty equal. I mean, white has this pass pawn over here, but black has their own set of pawns and stuff like that. But white is going to drop a pawn immediately. And I will just be talking to you guys in a second about why black is so much better than white. So the rook takes on h2. So now white has dropped the pawn. We have rook to e7. We have rook back to a2. We have rook to e4. We got h5. Rook goes to h4. Trying to prevent a further push of pawns. We have f6. We have king to g1, king to f7, king to f1. We have king to e6. We have rook to e4 with check, king to f5, rook to f4 with check, king goes to e5. And we're just kind of hoping we can kind of go back and forth and maybe get like some type of draw. So the rook goes back to h4. We have rook to d2. We got rook to b4. We have g5, making a lot of progress there on the king side. We got rook to b3. We have rook over to a2. And we have rook to b4. Now, the reason why rook to a2 had to be played is because we cannot allow this rook to be behind this pawn. Like, white's dream is that they can get their rook behind the pawn. Anytime you have a passed pawn, like a completely passed pawn, especially an outside passed pawn, you always want to try to get your rook behind the pawn. Because, you're going to get in a situation where you can just be behind the pawn and you can literally push the pawn all the way to the 7th rank. So just give you guys an example. You guys are probably pretty familiar with this situation. So let's say, for example, like black plays something, stupid like g4. You're going to get back behind this pawn. And now this rook is going to have to go all the way back here. And it's going to have to be, do something like that. The king is going to try to come over. And, I mean, you're pretty much going to be able to trade on that side of the board. And this is why, like, an outside pass pawn is much stronger than just a central pass pawn. Because black is going to have to spend so many moves to try to get this pawn. And so after king to e2, the king comes over here. You come up here. They're going to be trading here. And then you see that the black king is just way away from the action. Now, the situation is where you do have 2 extra pawns for black. But, black is just not able to come back and really get full control over the situation. Something like this. And you want to make sure that you don't capture immediately. You want to try to create somewhat of a trebuchet situation, because if you capture immediately, it's going to be a draw. So don't do that. So go down first. Actually, I might have gotten into a draw. It's winning, but I think I messed it up and got it into a draw. Let me see. Yeah, maybe I don't know. It's winning, but I mean, you guys get my point. Let me go back to the. Let me go back. But you guys get my point. Why you can't let the rook get behind the pawn. So like I said, rook to a2 came. We got rook to b4, and you are depriving white of being able to get right behind their pawn. We got king to f5. King goes to g1. We see rook to king to g6. We got rook to c4. And like you guys see, this rook is doing a really beautiful job at restricting the movement of this king. This king is much more movable than the white king. So we got g4. Rook goes to b4. We got f5. Rook goes to b8. We have h4. Pawn takes h4. We have rook takes a4. King to g2. And then the rook comes back down to a3. So it's further restricting the king. The rook goes to g8 with check. We see king to f7. Rook goes to g5. We got king to f6. We got rook to g8. We have rook to h3. We have rook to h8. We have king down to e5. We have h5. King to f6. We got h6. King to g6. Rook to g8 with check. We have king takes h6. We have king over to f2. Now, if you were to try to trade the rooks off, you would get into a winning type of endgame. So after rook to h8. You'd see the king down to g5, rook taking on h3, pawn taking on h3, and not capturing back immediately, going g3, king to g3. h2 deflects the king away, so after king going to h2, you got king to f4, and king to g2, and king to e3, and you're going to be able to march this pawn all the way home. And so going back to what we had in the game, we saw king to f2, we saw rook to a3, we saw king to g2, we got king to h5. We got king to f2, king to h4, rook to h8 with check, king coming up to g5. Oh, hold on. I went too far. My bad. King came to f2, and then king came to h4, and it is in this position that Mikhail Tal does resign the game. And he resigns because I was starting to show you guys before. A possible continuation would be rook h8 with check. And then the king would come over to g5. The king would go to e2. We'd see g3, rook to h7, and then f4. And as you guys can see, these pawns are rolling. And I mean, this rook is just really beautifully cutting off this king. So there really isn't a lot that this king can do. And this rook is kind of misplaced. And, once you get these pawns on the 6th rank, it, outmaneuvers a rook completely. A rook cannot hold 2 pawns on the 6th rank. So all you need to do is push this pawn one more step. And you really don't even need the rook against this other rook. So, yes. Apologize for going a little bit too far. I was trying to get done with this game real quick because it is a very long game. It's a 67 move game. I don't normally show games that are that long. I try to keep my videos, as short as possible. But I did want to get this game through because it was suggested to me. So I just thought, why not? I am kind of doing a Eugene Torre series. So that is that. So I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat po, King Mar Kaibigan. And Hagala. Appreciate you guys stopping by very much. Mabuhay to you guys. Ingat lagi. Almasal tayo. I think it's about 5 something in the morning. So I think some of y'all are getting up to get some breakfast. I appreciate you guys very much. Make more suggestions. Let me know what you want to see. And I'll just keep doing my Eugene Torre stuff. And I appreciate it, guys. And I'll see you guys next time.